Hello and welcome to Grief Seeds, a podcast where you'll find insights, reframings, metaphors, and visualizations, all known as grief seeds, to help you cultivate growth and healing in your life after loss. My name is Shelby Forsythia. I'm an intuitive grief guide and author, and on this show, I'll share insights from my interactions with clients, wise words from fellow grievers, and personal stories from my own life, with the hope that they transform your grief as they have transformed mine. Because even when it doesn't feel like it, we are planting the seeds of growth in the midst of great pain and heartache. Your grief is welcome here. Hi there, grief growers, and thank you so much for joining me for another episode of Grief Seeds. I'm so glad you're here with me today. On this episode, I want to offer you 3 little words that can give you such enormous relief from yourself in life after loss. Oftentimes, when grief rolls through, we are feeling things we have never felt. We are thinking thoughts that have never crossed our minds before. We are experiencing physically sensations that are so unfamiliar to our bodies. And even spiritually, sometimes we are asking questions about the world and ourselves and our lives and our purpose that we have never asked before. Grief makes all of this true. And yet, sometimes in life after loss, we participate in this phenomenon called self-gaslighting, where as much as we can, we try to talk ourselves out of feeling what we're feeling. We tell ourselves that we're over-dramatizing. We tell ourselves that other normal people don't feel this way. We tell ourselves it's not as bad as we think it is. Or we tell ourselves at the very worst that it's not even real, that what we're going through, that what we're feeling, that the questions that we're asking, that the thoughts that are pinging around inside our brain do not even exist. That somehow, because of some defect that is related to us, we're making it all up. And what a devastating thing to be told, to tell ourselves in the aftermath of loss, is this is not true. I don't trust you. I can't believe you. So what I have to offer you today, these 3 little words, I believe you. And I want you to start, dear grief grower, by saying these 3 words to yourself. Sometimes in life after loss, we are afraid to believe ourselves and our experience because if it is true, if we're asking these hard questions, if we're thinking these thoughts, if we're feeling these feelings, then we have to come face to face with grief. And that's true. That's real. That's very valid. To be afraid of that, to not want to believe ourselves, because if we don't actually believe ourselves, then we don't have to face ourselves in our grief. But what would happen if you put your hand over your own heart, or if you met your own gaze in the mirror, and just said, I believe you. I believe you. You can stop this meta torture of trying to prove to yourself that what you know is happening is actually happening. And rest in the reality that it is, and you believe yourself. You can stop wasting energy on trying to prove yourself wrong, or overly dramatic, or invalid, or a liar. Oh, what kind of a story is that in grief? You are lying about your pain. Yes. I believe you is very transformative, albeit very, very small. What would happen if you believed the extent and the depth and the existence of your grief, of your pain? I remember maybe a year or so now, I was leading an online course called Life After Loss Academy, and we had done a particularly hard week's session. We were all processing a lot of very big emotions together in a Facebook Live call. And in the chat, I encouraged everyone to just pop in and either tagging each other or even tagging themselves to say, I believe you. Christy, I believe you. Laura, I believe you. Grace, I believe you. Robert, I believe you. Nell, I believe you. And it was lovely to just see the chat on Facebook as we were doing this live coaching session together fill with the voices of grieving people, acknowledging each other and or acknowledging themselves in their pain. There was this moment, it seemed, where a space opened up, and anything we said about our grief, anything we said about our loss, anything we said about our thoughts, our emotions, our pain, our body sensations, was allowed to be true. And what a gift that was. What a holy space that was, to not have to fight to prove ourselves. To not have to wrestle with wondering whether or not we would be believed. And to rest in this space that had been created to simply allow our grief and our grieving and everything that we felt about it to be true. The first step in healing from loss, grief growers, is not trying to talk yourself out of your pain, but to admit, to recognize, to realize, to honor, acknowledge, validate, say yes to the fact that it is true. Because when you know your pain, when you can actually take an honest look at it, you have a place to start. What story in your mind are you seeking to untangle? What feeling is surfacing for you that you've never had to feel before, and how can you practice feeling it? What physical ailment is real for you right now that if you admitted was true, you could actually go and find answers and healing for? And what spiritual questions are arriving now that, if you believed them, could work as an invitation to guide next steps in your life? Here's something else that's neat about I Believe You, especially if you already do a marvelous job of believing yourself and validating yourself inside of grief. I Believe You is one of the easiest and most impactful gifts you can offer someone else who's grieving. Whether this is somebody else in your family and you're both grieving the same person who died, whether this is someone in your friend circle who's facing a divorce or a new diagnosis that's changing their life forever, whether you're speaking to your child or to a neighbor who had a bad day, whether you're talking to a coworker who's struggling with infertility or working to meet a deadline for a project, wherever grief appears in your life, no matter how long-standing, no matter how big or small, no matter if it is death-related or not, softly proclaiming, I believe you, can be such an enormous way to let somebody else know not only that you believe their pain, which is inherent in the phrase, but that they have somebody on their side, that they don't have to prove themselves to you any further, that their pain is legitimate in your presence. Saying something like, I believe you, that sounds so hard. Or, I believe you, this is a confusing situation. Or, that makes sense, I believe you, can go such a long way in validating the people around you. Because here's another thing about I believe you. You don't have to agree with the thoughts that they're telling themselves in their head, with what they think they're going to do next, with their perspective on grief in general. All that's required of you, and all that you're saying, when you say, I believe you, is that's true for you. I see that. I can honor that. I'm not going to try to talk you out of that. And whether you're offering that to somebody else, or whether you've got your hand over your heart and you're offering it to yourself, I believe you is such an extraordinary gift, especially in the midst of grief. I invite you to take a deep breath in with me here and out. May you, in your struggling, in your wrestling, in your rationalizing, in your figuring out of grief, what it means to grieve, and who grief is turning you into, offer yourself the validation, the rest, the ease, the permission, the love of I believe you. Allow yourself to become your first ally in grief, not your first bully, your first tormentor, your first gaslighter, your first naysayer. Let these 3 little words, I believe you, be a doorway to simply acknowledging what is true, so you can offer yourself the space to grieve, the space to find answers, the space to rest that you need in life after loss. Instead of forcing yourself to push through, to keep going, to ignore, to repress, to push down, to separate. Let I believe you act as a doorway, as an invitation back to alignment with yourself, allowing what is true for you to be true for you. And when you're well practiced at that, to allow I believe you to show up in your mouth on behalf of other people. To offer your trust in their experience and their reality. To be a doorway for them. That someone believes them. There is one less person on the planet that they have to prove themselves and their grief to. There is one more place where they can feel safe and heard. I believe you. I believe you. I believe you. Deep breath in here and out. Thank you so much for joining me today on Grief Seeds. So that's all for this episode of Grief Seeds. Thank you so much for listening today. You can find additional grief support at shelbyforsythia.com or by following me on social media at shelbyforsythia on Facebook and Instagram. If this podcast helped you in your life after loss, please leave a review and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. And be sure to share Grief Seeds with a friend, because you never know what someone you love is going through. A huge thank you to my Patreon supporters for financially keeping this podcast on the air. If you'd like to support Grief Seeds on Patreon through a yearly or monthly pledge, you can do so at patreon.com/shelbyforsythia. My Patreon supporters get access to behind-the-scenes content, including a once-a-month grief support call with me and 5 90-minute workshops with topics decided by grievers themselves. Again, that website is patreon.com/shelbyforsythia. Music for Grief Seeds is performed by Addie Goldstein. As always, my dear grief growers, it was beautiful sharing this space and time with you today. I see you. I am so proud of you and the work that you're doing in the world. And I love you. Because even through grief, we are growing.